Howdy there, Richard Schneeman talking about background tasks in Rails. So, in the past, we've only been using HTTP requests. Whenever you visit a browser, you go to google.com, that makes an HTTP request. And if that doesn't complete in 30 to 60 seconds, depending on how things are configured, then you're going to see a timeout. If you're running on Heroku, the timeout is 30 seconds. So 30 seconds is a really long time to just wait for a page render. But if you're trying to do something really complicated, really expensive, then it's not all that much time. If we wanted to, you see these supercomputers running and like cracking the genome sequence. They have to run for longer than 30 seconds. So if you need to do something like that in your Rails app, how do we do it? And you might say, well, what would I be doing in my Rails app that might take some time? So image processing, I've seen examples of people who they have services where you can upload photos and those photos then get cropped, and they'll change like the lighting, the all sorts of different things. One of them, you uploaded old texts, and it would actually try to pull out all of the text from those. So it was doing some OCR on the images, which was pretty intensive and sometimes took more than 30 seconds. So we might also be doing API requests. So anytime you're hitting an external service, maybe you're hitting Facebook, maybe you're hitting Twitter, it might be that they're running a little slow, and instead of a second or two for the API request, it takes 4 seconds, and maybe you're making 4 or 5 API requests, and those really add up, and it's pretty easy to get over 30 seconds if you're running multiple API requests. Importing data, if we're doing any of that, and there's many other different cases, but if you were ever doing something, and the important part is that none of these have to happen in the request cycle. So, you don't, whenever they're looking for that OCR text, they just want to upload the OCR text or the text, and then whenever they get the words pulled out of it, we can send them an email or something. Whenever we're done maybe pulling your friends from Facebook, we can send you an email and say like, oh, hey, look, we've got, it looks like you're friends with Dave on Facebook, and Dave is also on our service, so maybe you should be friends with them. But that's the important part, is these are not part of the traditional request cycle. So we can move them into background tasks. Yay. You'll be surprised since we're in the background task section. Some good libraries for background tasks. Rescue is a pretty great library. And it uses Redis as a storage backend. And this does mean that locally you're going to have Redis running on your computer, which if that sounds scary, don't worry about it. Redis, I love Redis. It's one of my favorite data stores. Typically whenever I have a project that I'm running in production, I will have Postgres for my main database. I will also have Rescue as a data store, I will have Redis as a data store, and you can go to redis.io, I believe, or just Google for Redis and get kind of a good overview introduction. You can do lots of interesting things with Redis. We don't have really enough time to truly do it justice right here. Sidekick is an alternative to Redis, uses threads rather than forking processes, though I do believe that might be worked into Rescue in the very near future. Delayed Job is also one that I have used. Notice I actually haven't used Sidekick, so I can't tell you whether it's good or not, but I have used Delayed Job. Delayed Job, instead of using Redis, actually uses your database. So if you're running a database in production, then you don't need 2 data stores. You can just use Delayed Job. The one problem of this is it does put load on your database. There's a lot of blog posts talking about how it's not a good idea to implement a queue inside of a database, and I do agree with that. So having your background tasks separated into a queuing system that is not part of your database can be really beneficial. In general, Delayed Job is nice if you're looking for something with minimal setup, but I would typically prefer to use a Redis-backed background task in production. All of those behave sort of a similar way. We are going to create a job, and we are going to add that job to a queue. Then we have a headless worker that is going to take tasks off of the end of that queue and then process them. So it's going to be first in, first out. And by headless, I mean it doesn't take HTTP requests. So we are going to have one server that all it does is sit there and it waits for you to, go to the home page or go to the user sign in, and it will render those back to the user. The worker doesn't have that. Well, we don't want it to have that capability. We only want it to focus on taking care of these background tasks so it can do them as quickly as possible. By doing this, we split up our application into a web side and a worker side, and this can give us some performance benefits. It also makes administration a little bit easier. And if it turns out that your web, maybe you're getting more people to your website than you initially expected, and you're not really using your worker as much, so you could scale up your web instances without having to also add more capacity to your worker system, or vice versa. Maybe you're finding, oh man, I'm doing a lot of background tasks, but not a lot of people are visiting my website, or they don't need a lot of extra capacity there. So you can add capacity where you need it. All right, so that's all I had to say about background tasks. There are quite a bit of documentation on each of those individually. Don't have time to really go into them. There's some good screencasts on Railscasts, and if you are interested in more information on anything we went over in this week's exercise, or in this week's lecture, or really anything in general, feel free to tweet at me. I'm at Schneems on Twitter. And I will be happy to take requests. If there's some popular topics, then might do a screencast on them or write a little blog post. All right. So this week's exercise, if you go to github.com/Schneems, we are going to be working on Reddit on Rails part 2. So last week we started off on a project where we said, you are going to build a web application from scratch, and I'm not going to help you nearly as much as I have in the past. So I'm still going to walk you through a lot of my thought processes on, how do we define a model? How are we going to want to verify certain things? How is a user going to be using the site? But this continues on from where we left off. We are going to do a section on, so last time we ended where you had a working user model, and the users could submit links. This is kind of similar to Reddit, where you can put a title and a URL. So we ended off with 2 user stories. One of them was creating comments, and the other one was creating votes. So we are going to be building both of those from scratch. We're going to cover how to associate models with one another, so how to associate a comment with a link, and also that same comment with a user, and vice versa, a very similar process with a vote and a user and a vote and a link. So that's very useful. We're going to cover pagination and a couple other little subtopics in there. So again, github.com/Schneems, and you can just search for Reddit on Rails. It is going to be the same repository as before, but you're going to look for, I believe it's part 2. Comments and votes.md, which is Markdown. Thank you very much for tuning in. Have a great day.